Okay, good evening. Welcome to the latest installment of Building the Scottish State. And I have in the run-up to the elections in May, I've been able to have the great pleasure of interviewing several candidates. And among them this evening is Stephanie Callaghan, who's running for the Uddingston and Bellshill constituency seat and is also on the Central List seat, if I'm not mistaken. So first of all, thank you very much for being with us and, welcome.
Thanks very much, Mark. Losing my words. Thanks very much, Mark. Delighted to be here with you tonight.
So first, just tell us about. So you're a councillor in. Just tell us about your political background, how you got into politics, your current status, and how the opportunity arose for you to run for the constituent seat in Uddingston.
Okay, so I grew up in a family that talked a lot about politics as well, and it was very much about principles and stuff, very much a Labour family that I grew up in. So as a student, I got a little bit involved in politics. I was out campaigning against nuclear weapons, campaigning against the poll tax, campaigning against student loans. I was actually signed up by a certain Mr. Jim Murphy when I was at Strathclyde University, when he was in second year and I was in first year. So I signed up to the Labour Party at that point in time, and I'd always thought of the SNP as being tartan Tories. So that's had kind of stuck with me, and I never ever really kind of paid attention to them at all. So life moved on. I went away and lived down south, went out and enjoyed myself, got work, went into jobs, always made sure that I voted. I did go in and vote Labour at every election for decades. And when the independence referendum came around, I initially thought that I would vote no. So it seemed quite important though. So I thought, I have to go and just have a little look, have a little read, make sure that I'm doing the right thing. And that kind of turned into maybe about 3 or 4 months of research and reading everything that I could find on either side of the argument, and becoming more and more and more convinced that actually Scotland should become an independent country. So it was very, very much about independence. I kind of signed up, went along to a kind of local meeting, just looked up online, found a meeting, went along to hear a bit more, and ended up knocking doors nearly every single night. I just kind of felt, this is my kids' future. I've got 3 kids just now that are school age. And I thought, if I don't do everything possible to try and win this better future for them, then, I'll just regret it for the rest of my life. So I went out and knocked doors nearly every night. So I didn't actually join the SNP until just after the independence referendum in 2014, like an awful lot of other people.
Yes.
So I joined just after
just before or just after? Sorry.
Just after the referendum.
Yeah.
So I suppose you're thinking too.
When it got up to like 100, it got up to like 120,000 or so of members.
Yeah, that's right. So quite a lot of people joined at the same time. So I was actually in October time. I wasn't one of those people that was online trying again and again and again. I just kind of waited until it started dying down a little bit and then joined at that point there. But very quickly, within that first year even, I joined the branch executive. So I wasn't working at that point in time. Sorry, my phone's turned on there. I wasn't working at that point in time. I'd had my wee girl and she hadn't been that well, and I'd been made redundant while I was off on maternity leave.
What was your previous job that you got?
So my background was, I've done a lot of jobs. So I've worked in pubs, I've worked in shops, I've been a retail manager, I've been a pub manager. But really most of my career was spent in working with young people. So it was kind of employability and job skills training. So I spent quite a bit of time out in Easterhouse and Drumchapel in Glasgow.
Some of the most deprived areas in the UK.
Yeah, so it was working with 16 to 18-year-olds, helping them get into jobs and delivering job skills. And I was also a project coordinator as well for 13 to 16-year-olds. So that was kids who were non-attenders at school. So sometimes that could be children that were disruptive, but it could be other stuff too. So social and academic problems that they had there. So some of those kids went on and kind of sat exams. Some of them did different development work, went along to different courses, attended school part-time, all different things there as well. And they were just actually a great bunch of kids. I think, a lot of the time what gets reflected is, how these kids have had to be as they're growing up to be able to survive and to be able to thrive and to be able to be strong. People think they're really rough and, they can end up in quite a bit of trouble. But actually, when you get these kids on a one-to-one basis, they're not really all that different from other kids, and at that kind of young age, then you can influence them as well, and you can make a difference. And quite often you'll hear people saying things like, kids that are causing problems, and they take them away to Edinburgh Zoo and they take them away and do these nice things with them. But what they don't realise often is that a lot of these kids have never been out their own housing scheme. There's a lot of territorial issues as well. If they just, some of the parents also did work as a placement officer, so going out and talking to employers and getting them to take these young people on, and they would go along and they would work alongside their staff and stuff, so that they could have something to put on their CV, learn the kind of skills they needed to be able to do a job. And some of their parents from Parkhead, which is what in Glasgow, in 10 minutes out the town centre, hadn't actually ever been in Glasgow town centre in their life, so it just shows you how different life is. And when you take kids out of these places and take them to other places, they get to see that life can be something different, that they're not stuck there, that there's options, that there's a future, that they could get a job and they could have their own flat and they could have a car, because a lot of the time everybody who's round about them is unemployed and claiming benefits, and they grow up, the same as some kids grow up thinking, I'm going to go to university when I finish school, or go to college and get a qualification. A lot of these kids grow up thinking, I'll grow up and I'll leave school and I'll be on the dole. And they just don't really think out with that at all. So then I joined the SNP. Well, I skipped back to that bit there.
Sure.
So I joined the SNP after the referendum and was on the branch exec very, very quickly there as well. And by the end of 2015, I was standing for council. So very, very quick. And in January 2016, I was elected for the first time. So I was an opposition councillor to start off with at South Lanarkshire Council. And in May 2017, we became the administration. We won the council election. So our group came into administration. So I've also been an administration councillor. So a councillor for about the past 5 years, 5+ years. And administration is quite a different job too, with COVID and all that's been going on as well. Council policies can be a bit like trying to change things, can be a bit like wading through treacle. There's lots of boxes, there's lots of red tape, but with COVID coming along, all of a sudden we had to change lots and lots of things right across every resource really, really quickly, and then change them again very, very quickly too. So it's been really good experience, I suppose, as well. And the focus has been on supporting people and getting food out to people and picking up prescriptions for people, and lots of jobs that maybe the council wouldn't normally do. And that's involved a lot of work with third sector organisations, voluntary organisations and stuff as well there. So
okay. And how would you evaluate your performance in doing that? Obviously COVID is something completely unprecedented, but do you think that, how would you evaluate, the council's performance in that, and how you've been able to deal with the COVID situation?
I think actually the council's performance has been incredible. You're in a situation where you're still delivering all the services that need to be delivered, so all the essential services that need to be delivered. You've got less staff who are in the offices as well, because people are unwell through COVID, or people are isolating with COVID too. You've also got social distancing coming into play as well. So even really simple things like, coming out to collect your bins. You're talking about, you've got people coming out to collect your bins and they can't sit in the same truck. So they need to take separate vehicles. So lots of things like that, plus all the kind of being out there and delivering prescriptions, funding food, delivering food to people as well, delivering special meals for people that have allergies or that come from certain religions and things as well. So it was very, very good from the point of view. We'd brought in a community engagement team quite early on when we came into administration, and they were just had reached out and really started rooting themselves into communities. So we were in a very fortunate position where when the pandemic struck, our administration were able to sit down, immediately pull in all the third sector organisations and lots of voluntary organisations, lots of anchor organisations, we call them, that know what they're doing, that people have PVG checks and things like that as well, that mean they're okay to be working with vulnerable people and stuff. And we all sat down at a table and looked at stuff and thought, what do we do? What can we all contribute? How do we make this work? How do we look after people? How do we keep people safe and well and save lives? And as well, obviously delivering all your essential services out with that. So I think actually we did incredibly well, and the council workers, there were people, it was stopping people from working. It was the biggest problem, you know, not getting people to help. It was getting people to actually take time out and not be in their computers at 7 o'clock at night, or not be on when they were supposed to be on the day's leave or whatever as well. So yeah, it's been amazing. But the communities have matched that, I think, too. Everyone stepped up.
Okay, and tell us about your campaign. So you're again, you're running for the Uddingston and Bellshill. Tell us about the person who's retiring that you mentioned when we were and how your campaign's going so far.
Okay, so Uddingston Bellshill Constituency takes in quite a few different areas. I actually live in Hamilton, and it takes in part of Hamilton. So I was born here, I live here, I work here, I went to school here as well. So it takes in a bit of Hamilton as well. It takes in a lot of villages too. So there's quite a lot of different council wards there as well. It takes in parts of Motherwell. So it's not just Uddingston Bellshill, although that's what the name would maybe suggest there. So Richard Lyle is currently the MSP for the area. So he's the very first SNP MSP for the area. But Richard as well has been an elected representative of the SNP for a very, very, very long time, since his younger years. So he joined North Lanarkshire Council initially, and he has basically given a lifetime. His whole career has been spent working for local people. So Richard is the longest serving elected member in the SNP, and that's not something that's likely to change at any point in time soon. And if I was elected at this point in time as well, I would be the first female MSP. So Richard has made history, and there's a possibility, should I be elected as well, that I'll also make history.
Okay. All right. Okay. And what would be, were you to be elected, what would be your priorities? What would you like to focus on within the Scottish government in terms of, aside from independence, of course, but we'll get to that. I mean,
well, that was going to be my first answer, of course, was going to be independence, because so much of everything else actually depends on us getting our independence and having the powers to actually be able to do a lot more. But I think, are you talking about in the local area? I'm guessing that you mean.
Look, I mean, just what you would bring to, well, sure, if the local area, what areas of expertise you would bring to the Scottish government in order to develop policy, that type of thing. What would you bring to the office if you could?
So I suppose my past career is working with young people and working with people who are struggling, who've got a lot of poverty. I've also chaired our social work committee on South Lanarkshire Council as well. I think I'm somebody who strategically, I tend to think quite strategically, and I tend to think quite holistically. So a lot of the time as well, it's about actually how things fit together and what ripples are going to come out. You know, if you change A, B or C, then what other ripples could come out from that. So I suppose a lot of it as well is doing committee work and scrutinising reports or legislation that's coming forward, asking detailed questions to make sure, you know, thinking about what could the problems be here, what would happen if this happened. So a lot of that kind of stuff there. I suppose it's about rolling your sleeves up and getting into that and getting the hard work done.
Okay, and what are the powers that the Scottish government lacks that would bring independence would bring about, that would enable would enable the Scottish government, an independent Scottish government, to tackle these issues better? What are the reserve powers to Westminster that would be much better, in your view, would be much better employed if they were to be used by the Scottish government?
Well, what I would say just now is that there's so much that's reserved to Westminster. I mean, you look at probably one of the first things that comes to mind is defence. So you're looking at nuclear weapons on our Clyde. Now, rather than us spending so much money renewing Trident and nuclear weapons, which are right in the middle of central Scotland as well, with so many people around here, you know, basically puts a target in our back. We don't even control where or when these weapons are fired. That's often the US of A. But it's taken so much money to fund. And my idea in that is, you know, use that money to actually support our kids, bairns not bombs is something that you often hear in Scotland. So right away, that's one of the policies there. But the Westminster government control an awful lot of things. So for example, during COVID, we could have done things very differently as well. We could have taken decisions around, closing borders down. We could have taken decisions around actually borrowing money to be able to deal with COVID earlier, being able to shut things down. You're looking at a situation where, yeah, the UK government provided furlough. We were having to fight to say, can we have furlough money in certain areas of Scotland where things are quite bad just now? The Scottish government aren't able to borrow. So there's just, there's so many things, and we only get just over half the tax that we send down to Westminster back to decide how we spend that. And the other half is decided by Westminster, and they also borrow on our behalf as well there. So really, we need those full powers to be able to integrate everything and have an overall plan. Just now, I think we're doing really incredibly well, but we are jumping about with, one leg tied up and a hand behind our back just now. So it'd be so much easier if we're able to look at the big picture and make the changes as that we want to see.
Okay, and how do you see that coming about? I mean, and given the context of the let's just say friction between the Alba Party and the SNP, and I looked, and I believe that in the Central Scotland list seats there are currently no SNP list members, if I'm not mistaken. And so, what is your view on the SNP 1 and 2 relative to SNP 1, Alba 2? How do you see that, and what is your view on support for the and the logic that Alba is putting forward, that if you have if half of the SNP members who voted list in the previous election vote for Alba, that they would have 20 or 30 Alba members, because as you know, the better you do on the constituency, the less well you do on the list. So just give me your view on that and how you see this.
Well, first off, it depends how well that you do. So what I would say is, last time for Central Scotland, we got 52.8% of the constituency votes.
Okay.
But we got 47.7% of the list vote. Now, even if we won every constituency in Central Scotland, if we went from 52.8% up to 54.2% of the vote, we would still win a list seat with 54.2%, even if we had all the constituencies. If it went to 60%, we would win 2 list seats. So what I would say is, the more votes you get, the more seats that you're going to win. And if there is an issue and one of the constituency seats that is expected to be SNP isn't SNP, you need those list votes. That's what it's there for. That brings you in that seat that you managed to just miss out on. So for me, it's absolutely, your logical choice is your second vote is really about voting for the party of government and who you want for First Minister. And this kind of like giving your second vote away if you're an SNP supporter, I would say, is absolutely not without its risks. When you do the calculations and you look at the list votes that are all coming through there, by the time you get to the bottom and you get to that last list seat, or the second last one, it's a very, very tiny percentage of differences there that you're looking at to see what way it is that seat actually goes. And one of the risks with Alba is that if they're taking away SNP list votes and they're taking away Green list votes, then actually you're making it much less likely that you get an independence person in that seat.
Okay. Well, on the other hand, they could also take seats away from the Tories and the Liberal Democrats and Labour as well. I mean, so anyway.
Well, do you know? See, just when you're mentioning that there, yeah, that's a possibility. But this idea of a supermajority, I don't buy it. It's, and I'd like to know how much is a supermajority. What is it they're actually looking for? I keep hearing, maybe 75% or something like that. Now, realistically, talking about 50% of SNP voters voting for Alba, that is never going to happen. That's just not, it's voter behaviour that it's completely out of line with. There are some people who are very involved in politics, who are reading a lot of this stuff, who are looking into the complexities of it. But the actual reality of the situation is, even a lot of people who are SNP members, They sign up, they pay their direct debit because they want to make a contribution to independence, but actually beyond that, they don't do very much more. So they don't come along to branch meetings. They maybe don't even open the party emails. They're quite happy just to be making that contribution. And these people will spend no time at all. They will walk into the polling station on polling day and they will cast their vote there and then without having given any consideration to vote for any other parties or sat down and looked at any other information. So this idea that you're going to get 50% of SNP voters going out there and changing their list vote is just completely unrealistic, if you ask me. In fact, in council elections, we've gone out before in places where we could win 2 seats in the council. It's done by STV voting. So we could win 2 people, SNP, on those seats because we've got enough votes, but people are listed alphabetically. So what we do is, in one part of the ward area, we'll ask people to vote, for example, myself number 1 and you number 2. And in another area of the ward, we'll ask people to vote you number 1 and me number 2 so that we can get those 2 people in. And it is absolutely impossible. The huge majority of people will go in there, and whoever's first in the alphabet, whoever's first in that list will get the number 1 in their box for SNP, and whoever's the second SNP person in the list will get number 2 in the box there as well. So you still end up getting the person who's early in the alphabet elected, and the person that's further down doesn't get elected.
Okay, all right. Well, let's just take the presumption that Alba does do quite well, and they maybe send if they imagine they get 15 to 20 seats, which would give a huge independent supermajority, a significant supermajority to the in the upcoming Scottish Parliament. How do you? And Alex Salmond has said that his central goal is to shake things up and to get going on independence and to start negotiations with Westminster for a referendum. Whereas Nicola Sturgeon, as head of the SNP, has said that she intends to have a referendum within the next Parliament. It's unclear exactly when, and that she was committed to having a Section 30 order and calling it the gold standard, and saying that it's the only legitimate and legal way that would get international recognition. I've done research with a group that I'm working with, and I don't see it that way. I think there's different ways of getting independence, and it doesn't have to be. And under international law, by definition, a seceding country does not have to follow the law of the country it's breaking away from. So how do you see it? And again, the means to achieve independence that is desired by, if more than 50%, if polls are to be believed, how do you see the route to that? And given how Alba sees it, how the SNP stated policy is, how do you see that?
Right, well, I wouldn't disagree with you. I agree there is certainly more than one route to independence. However, having held an independence referendum previously, after winning the 2011 election, then that was because we won an SNP majority. So it was because they had the majority of seats in Holyrood, and that's why we got the Section 30. So I think turning away from a Section 30 just now, when there's a good possibility that we could get a majority at Holyrood, I think that lets Boris and the Tories off the hook, because they have been in that position before. They granted a Section 30 order, and that is the easiest, clearest path to the next independence referendum. So it's not the only way, but if we start looking all over the place and looking at different stuff just now, it really backs them into a corner. If we get that majority, it becomes incredibly, incredibly difficult for them to say no. And if there's a majority of voters in Scotland that vote for independence, then for them to say no, it's not just to the SNP this time around. They're saying no to the people of Scotland, and I suggest that other parties will start getting on board too. I noticed in 2019, after the general election, you had Alison Evison, for example, who's the chair of Cllr, who's a Labour councillor, immediately saying, if people vote by a majority for a referendum in the May election, we're going to have to give them it. Monica Lennon also said the same. Jed Killen, who was previously an MP for Labour as well, said exactly the same there too. So yeah, I don't deny there are other routes to an independence referendum, and supposing if we have to, we'll be deciding to, take that forward. If there is an Indie majority in Parliament, then definitely the SNP will be moving forward with a referendum, and it will be down to Boris to challenge that. But you probably saw me pull my book out there. It's because I was watching Tasmina. She'd been on doing a bit of a debate last night.
Yes.
And what she was saying was about the fact that, in fact, what was the words that you used? You used words earlier on that Tasmina had used. They were there. It was a bit of disruption and stuff as well,
Yeah, shaking things up. Yes, yes.
Shaking things up a bit. I think
shaking things up because her name is Tasmina Shake. So.
There we go.
She's shaking things up. Yeah.
So I think it's really important to bear in mind as well, through the pandemic and stuff too, it's not about persuading people who already believe in independence, that we need a referendum, that they should be voting for independence. It's about persuading people that didn't vote for independence last time around, that independence is now the right option. And there is so much has changed, with being hauled out of Europe and all the rest of it, COVID and everything else that's going on. And I'm not sure that shaking things up, if you like, is actually the best way to be going forward. I think Nicola Sturgeon has walked a very, very careful line during this pandemic as well. She's been very careful not to politicise things because, we've all had to step in and really help each other and look after each other. Had there been things right away, about closing borders and stuff like that, that would have set people on political sides. It would have made people entrenched in how they felt. That stops people looking after each other when they feel they're on opposite sides, if you like, there. So it was really important to actually do that. So as far as, wanting an independence referendum straight away, and Tasmina was saying we should be doing it now, it's during the pandemic, it doesn't matter, it's something that we should be doing right now, right this minute. We should be taking ahead straight away, even though COVID is still going on there. But I think the beauty of the referendum last time around as well was all the different groups that were involved, that connected with each other, that connected within their own circles. With that summer of independence too, where there was so much build up, there were marches, there was all this energy and everything behind it. And I think that's something as well that would be very, very difficult to recreate during the COVID situation there too. So I do think it's sensible to say, have it in the first part of this Parliament, in the first half of this Parliament that's coming. I think that's quite reasonable. It's quite sensible. It gives you time to talk to people. People are in a position again where they're stepping back and they're going, right, I need to think about my kids' future, my grandkids' future, and weigh that up, which is very much what people did in the first referendum.
Okay, just playing a devil's advocate a bit here, but from what Alex Salmond is saying is the urgency of independence, and as you were correctly pointing out, the powers that Scotland lacks at this time that is reserved to Westminster would be very, very useful right now, especially coming out of the pandemic. And the idea that, okay, we'll wait a couple years, maybe we'll have one in the first half of this one, where the Westminster is given every indication, A, that they're not democratic. Boris Johnson is not a Democrat. And in my own view, I don't see the way that increased support for independence has any bearing whatsoever on his attitude. I mean, it's one thing to say, yes, well, of course he's not, he can't argue against a majority. Well, he can. I mean, he has no scruples whatsoever. I mean, he's completely corrupt. And the idea that he would, grant a Section 30 that would get, where they lose control over the nuclear weapons, the oil, I just don't. I mean, it's my own view. I just don't see that happening. So,
well, I don't disagree with that. And I think what you have to do though is you have to put them in a situation where you force them to refuse that, despite everything that you've done. I think something the SNP have done is they've gone up, they've banged on every door, they're looking at every route, every pathway to independence. They're going up there, they're hammering on the door, it's been shut in their face. They're hammering on the next door, it's been shut in their face. The whole world is watching this as well. So if we go up and we hammer on that door and Boris still says no, then we go ahead, we put that forward, we start taking a referendum forward, and it will be up to him to come and challenge us in court. But it does leave a situation where you're saying to Boris, so what is it that we need to do? how on earth can the people of Scotland actually get independence if, you know, even a democratic vote isn't enough? So it's not about the fact that Boris will necessarily say yes. He might well have to say yes. It might be, you know, internationally, etc. as well there, that he gets to a point where he's like, I just can't really say no anymore, especially if other parties in Scotland are saying, no, like, you know, we can't possibly say, you know, the people have voted for it and you know, we're not going to support them. So it might be that he does say no, it might be that he gives in, but really it doesn't matter. What matters is putting that pressure on him and really pushing him on that point there, rather than having a scattergun approach and letting him divert attention away to something else.
Yeah. Okay. And what is your view on EU membership? I mean, of course, we had the 2016 election, referendum, and Scotland has, done, and Nicola Sturgeon in particular has done everything she could to avoid Brexit and to, or at least, put forward, proposals to make Brexit, better, if not. But now Scotland's out. And the idea of getting back in is, I know that, Scotland through Alan Smith and others have built up a huge amount of goodwill in Brussels, and there's a lot of sympathy for the cause. But I don't see a really clear route to getting back. I've done with the group that I've mentioned before. That we talk about. We meet on Saturdays and talk about the Scottish Constitution. I've been in contact with EFTA, and it's been basically said that if Scotland is able to, even if they, and I put it in the context of a plebiscite election, coming up, that this election be made a plebiscite on independence, they said that basically they would consider that a legitimate means to become independent once, because the key to joining EFTA is that you have the government is competent to sign international treaties and the powers to abide by them, basically being an independent country. But they're not totally, they didn't say, oh, you have to get a Section 30 order, you have to do this. No, as long as the government has these competences. And getting back into EFTA and back into the EEA would be a matter of weeks and months rather than years. And there are many, industries that, the fishing industry and the agriculture industry that, would need this now. How do you see that? What are your views on EFTA and the EU? And because there are several countries, for example, Austria and Sweden and Portugal, that were EFTA members before becoming part of the EU. So how do you see that? How do you see Scotland's status in the EU or in EFTA, or what are your views on that?
Well, I would certainly be hoping that in the longer run that we would be ending up as full members of the EU. But yeah, I don't see any problem at all with those other stepping stones there and getting those things implemented quickly, because there will be criteria that Scotland need to meet. They'll be looking at the Copenhagen criteria and stuff like that. But the reality of the situation as well is there's a lot of people
for EFTA or for the EU?
No, for the EU.
Okay. Because basically, I asked, and he said all Scotland has to do once it has this competence to sign international treaties and the powers to abide by them, they send a letter to the EFTA Council. The four of their governments get together and they say, yeah, come on down, and then they would help the EEA members, which excludes Switzerland out of Switzerland is not in the EEA. And they have a bunch of treaties. It's really complicated, but then you have Norway, Iceland, Norway, Iceland, and Liechtenstein that are in the EEA, and they would speak with one voice to get Scotland back in the EEA as quickly as possible. There's the question of the customs union, and I just got an email from my friend, from my contact in the EFTA, and he can't comment on that. But it looks as if an EFTA relationship would be up to the Scottish government to construct, and there's no reason they couldn't ask to be members of the customs union. and be accepted. It's just, and they can, and Scotland can get back into the Erasmus program. They can get back into any program they want, and they can pick and choose, and they pay into the EU programs they want. And I mean, so that's why, in my view, waiting around for Boris Johnson to grant a Section 30 when there could be an alternate route that would get Scotland back in the EEA quickly is preferable. But that's just my view. But
well, I think as well, if we were polling at like 70% just now in support of independence, then yeah, why wouldn't you go for that at this election?
Mhm.
But I don't think that's the reality that we're in just now. We don't have a big majority for independence at this moment in time. There hasn't been a campaign for independence, and I think we need that campaign to make sure that we are successful.
Okay.
If that makes sense. So I'm not disagreeing with you as to after anything else there. I'm saying longer term, though, I would be hoping that we could move to full EU membership. And I don't think, it's like you said, there's not really any barriers when you're talking about going to EFTA or whatever there as well. But I think very, very often the barriers to actually rejoining the EU are made much, much bigger than they are. You have to be meeting this criteria, that
Well,
criteria, that criteria. When you're
with that.
actually saying, no, you need to be working towards those. There are other countries who have joined the EU who are working towards those achievements, who have shown progress towards them. And as well, we've got the situation where Scotland, basically, we've been an EU member for a long time. So we're very much aligned with them in loads and loads of stuff there that other countries are having to, it takes them ages to join because they're working towards ABC and working towards getting up to the EU standards, whereas we're pretty much there already. There's only going to be like little bits and pieces that have changed that we'd need to bring in line that have changed in the meantime. But the longer we're out of the EU as well, then the more disparity there can be.
And the more deregulation that the UK is done, it does in Scotland because of staying in the UK and out of the EU. That's in my view why it's pretty urgent. And I mean, I would advocate much more rapid progress on getting independence other than waiting around. But again, that's just my view. So I wanted to address the I see the questions coming up, and we'll get to those before the end of the program. But you were mentioning when we were chatting before, we were talking about the notion of community and how that's evolved, and how and from what you were talking about, your experience in the council, it really sounds as if there's a very good sense of community in terms of how how you've worked together, how you help people to get food delivered, to get prescriptions delivered. And so so how do you, but we were also talking about how through the media, there's been such a cleavage between, kind of the strivers versus the skivers, the people who work against it. Talk a little bit about that in your own experience, and do you feel that the sense of community has been diminished given what you've seen, and how, policy-wise, do you think that a better sense of community could be restored?
My goodness, that's quite a big question, really. I think when I was speaking to you earlier beforehand, I spoke about when I was younger and I grew up in a council housing scheme, and everybody was skint. So we did our hiding from the milkman bit and stuff like that as well. But there was that feeling that everybody was in it together. Everybody was in the same kind of situation. And I think what's really changed, particularly since 2010, when the Tories came to power, is there's been this peddling in the press about people being, just like you were saying there as well, about unemployed people being lazy, not caring, not wanting to work.
Getting money and blowing it out, alcohol and drugs, or vacations, or
they smoke it all, and they drink it all, and all the rest of it as well. So it's been about this othering of people who are unemployed. Now, I think, in a way, I think COVID has actually been a bit of a leveler, because all of a sudden we've had all these people, lots and lots of people who never ever foresaw themselves being in a really difficult set of circumstances, and not having money come in. And all of a sudden, COVID has just turned their lives upside down. So you've got loads of people who have never had to deal with councils, never had to claim universal credit, never had to claim any kind of benefits or anything, never expected to have to claim these kind of things, who all of a sudden, you know, are going, oh my God, having to wait 5 weeks for a universal credit payment. How on earth can I deal with that? How can I do that? Looking at just the level of money that's paid for universal credit, the reality of welfare to me is, and it was an amazing concept, you know, is I think people, in fact, before I even go into that, sorry, what I was really going to say there about it is that tragedy can strike any of us. And I think that's what COVID has really shown. At any point in time, out of the blue, tragedy can strike us down and we just don't know when it's going to happen. So it gives all the more onus on the fact of, you know, we have to have a really good safety net there. We need to look after people. And when people do get struck down, we need to be reaching out and pulling them back up rather than throwing them down a big hole that they can't really get out of. You know, it just gets worse and worse and worse, and they lose their house, they lose their, you know, they lose their car, and poverty just gets worse and worse and worse. You know, you've got a nice house and it's going to stay nice for a while. If you don't have any money, then eventually you're not going to be painting, you're not going to be renewing carpets, you're not going to be renewing flooring, and eventually, you know, it just gets worse and worse and worse there, and it has a horrible impact on people. The other thing that I was going to say about it was, oh goodness, I've lost my train of thought there as well because I went backwards. What was the next bit you'd said to me?
Oh, just what types of policies do you think that, you know, could kind of restore or rebuild a sense of community?
Yeah, so I think the fact that we've had the pandemic, it's been a situation where people have really stepped up to look after each other. So it's kind of broken down a lot of those barriers there where you had, you know, folk. The thing about the you know, the stuff coming about people being lazy and feckless and all the rest of it as well.
Yeah.
You know, it was about isolating people.
Mm-hmm.
So people weren't connecting with each other, and that's one of the most important things that we do as human beings, is connecting with each other and looking after each other and feeling like other people actually care about us and care about what happens to us. That's incredibly important for all of us to feel that way, rather than feel that we're forgotten, we don't matter, nobody cares about us. So I think, for example, things like the new Scottish Child Payment, which loads of charities have described as being, you know, it's going to change so many lives there. The Scottish Child Payment is going to make an absolutely massive, massive difference to families. And it's going to stop families being in the situation as well where poverty is something that goes down the generations, because when parents are really, really fighting and struggling to get through things day to day, their mental health is affected. They're not able to put food on the table. They're not able to provide a warm home. They're incredibly stressed, and all those feelings and all that hopelessness, that sinks into our children as well. And it means neurologically that they start developing differently as well, you know, that they're dealing with that kind of toxic stress, that they don't have a parent that's a really strong anchor, you know, that's standing there and able to go, things will be okay, you know, when the child's stressed. So all of this feeds into each other, and it just saves up huge problems for generations to come. There's also the additional investments that are going to be going into mental health that were announced in the Scottish Government manifesto as well, and a lot of that will be into community mental health, and there will be a particular focus on young people as far as that's concerned too. So I think putting money in people's pockets is a huge thing we need to be doing, and the Scottish Child Payment will do that for an awful lot of families. And investing in mental health is a huge thing that we need to do as well there, as well as looking at our NHS. We've got more nurses per head, more GPs per head in Scotland. We've got the top performing A&E. So these kind of universal services are absolutely vital as well for keeping us all good.
Okay, that leads very, very well into the questions. The first question from Stephen, when will mental health and PTSD be fixed? I've had nothing for 4 years, housebound, it's horrible, and breaking people are left behind. Or how? So, I mean, obviously the, you know, worldwide mental health issues are enormous, even more so now that people have been so isolated. What would you say to that in terms of the way that mental health treatment can be improved? And you've touched on this to some extent in your earlier comments, but
well, again, and probably partly because of COVID, there is a 10-year mental health strategy just now that is underway. Again, you're looking at funding all the time. Funding is always a problem. And that's something that only really with independence can actually set our society up in a different way, if you like. But you are looking at, there's a big increase in funding coming through in the manifesto for mental health, and at least half of that is going to be in community mental health services, which is one of the areas where it is really, really needed most urgently. So the kind of focus of this is that people are getting help when they need it, rather than having to be on big long waiting lists. So you've got kids waiting on CAMS and all the rest of it as well there. So it's really looking at CAMS and how that operates and how people are being assessed, and that we're reaching out and we're giving mental health support early. But you've also got stuff as well, like you've got mental health ambassadors within schools. So there's been a lot of background stuff going on there as well, that looks at young people being able to help and support each other through things. And again, I think it comes back to this thing about community quite a lot of the time as well, Mark. It's about putting things in local areas where people are able to access them, and having an ethos and a culture in society where it's about looking out for each other and looking after each other and supporting each other. And I think that's a really incredibly important part of it as well. I think it's going to play a big part. So it's about, in a way, a lot of the people that have stepped up and a lot of the way people have started looking after each other. It's about tapping into that and making sure that's something that we're actually building on, and that we're we're investing.
Just my own personal observations. I grew up in the United States. I've lived in France for 20 something years. And every time I've come to Scotland, and you know, and growing up, I just remember that sentiment of people just really caring about each other. And it's precious and it's rare. And, you know, I mean, compared to the US, where it's, you know, very all for yourself. I mean, you have individuals, you care about people, of course, but the media and, you know, film and propaganda has kind of expunged basic empathy for fellow human beings from the national discourse. Of course, people feel empathy for others, you know, individuals, but, you know, as in terms of a kind of a societal value, it's been completely devalued, or at least whereas in my experience in Scotland, it hasn't gone away. And it's something that, in my view, definitely, I mean, it should be built on, and just the, you know, and it hasn't been eliminated, you know, in Scotland, whereas, you know, maybe other parts
instead of being in competition with each other all the time, it's about actually working together.
They're not fellow human beings; they're competitors. Or you know, and you've got to compete with them, and even the way you talk about other countries, you know, countries are competitors; they're not like friends, or you know, and that's.
Oh yeah, we could get into actually what the representatives for each country should be doing for the world as well, and how we should be thinking about voting for them, and it should be about how we can all contribute. But I won't go down that road just now and distract us. But I think what you said is really important there as well. You talked about the fact that that's something that you see in Scotland.
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
That's really apparent to you. And I think one of the problems is that we're not seeing that as much down south. They've got a very, very, very different attitude. Now, people like to sometimes think, you know, oh, we're different, we're a bit better. I don't believe that for a single second. And we don't like to think that we're all really heavily influenced, but actually what people at the top of government are saying, and what ministers are saying, and what the Scottish Government is saying, that actually does have a big influence on how people view the place they live and they view Scotland. So those messages that are coming down in Scotland, in fact, in City Council as well, a lot of the policies that we're getting through and stuff, you're hearing words in those policies like kindness. Yeah. You know, you're thinking, and
love, and even love.
That's where it's at.
I don't know when the last time love was heard in Westminster, but
there you go. And you look down south. That
word was uttered.
And what you hear Boris talking about people from other countries making horribly racist comments. You look at disabilities, you look at what they did with disability allowances and disability payments. They basically reduced people's payments, took money off disabled people. They started sending them that they have to go and get an assessment where, you know, they're under scrutiny all the time. And actually, it costs us more money as taxpayers, because what actually happens is they give a massive sum of money to different companies like ATOS, who then carry out the assessments on those disabled people. And actually the amount of money that they pay to these companies, who sometimes there's a bit of democracy around that as well there. The amount of money they get paid, it's like your PPE contracts all over as well. But basically, reducing disabled people's benefits has cost us more money. It was a way of funneling money into people's pockets in exactly the same way they've done with PPE. Yeah.
The corruption is just monumental. And I mean, in my view, that's why Scotland should get out as quickly as possible and
absolutely.
But I want to get to that because you know, in some of the following questions. Basically, I mean, I understand you running both on the list seats and the constituent seats. I certainly understand your position. However, if they do let's see, there's a couple. If SNP are an Indie party, why won't they work with Alba or Green to wipe out the red, blue Tory and get on with Indie? Let's see. The Annabelle Ewing has a majority of only 1,200. The Greens are standing a candidate against her. What do you think of the Greens standing against candidates in 12 constituency seats? So answer that as you like, but the possibility that if Alba, that if there was a tactical voting, I mean, I think the argument is, well, Alba is saying vote SNP on the constituency level. They currently only have 4 constituency seats, list seats in all of Scotland. So why not encourage each other so that there's a much more formidable independence majority? And again, bearing in mind your circumstances as a candidate.
So well, one question I would ask as well then is, that's the way Alba are framing it, and yet Alba are standing in the areas where the SNP have list seats.
Mm-hmm.
So
okay.
If it's all completely about Max and then why are they doing that and risking splitting the vote?
Well, a total of 4 in all of Scotland, whereas the Conservatives
yep.
and have much more.
Yeah, but I just mean it just takes away slightly from this idea. It's about it's just about winning list seats all over the place there. But what I would say is I think, and I would say this to people, regardless of what party it is that they support, I would say if you support independence and you want independence for Scotland, then what the Tories are most frightened of, what the unionist parties are most frightened of, is an SNP majority in Holyrood. That is what they fear the most. That is the most difficult thing for them to argue against, to prevent a referendum. That is the biggest battering ram that we've got. And the reality is, that's my rationale, is that you all get behind the biggest battering ram and you absolutely hammer the road down, then you split off into smaller ones there. I think there's much more power in putting all our power in the one place. I think the SNP are the vehicle of independence. I don't disagree that people, shouldn't be able to vote for other parties. I know that some people, their green policies, as far as things are concerned, trump independence. But I think it's worth remembering as well that actually the Greens took the decision to stay in opposition to the SNP in 2016 rather than go into coalition. And the Greens opposed, for example, the Queensferry crossing. So there's at times as well, although the Greens are an independent supporting party, that green policies actually trump independence. So for me, it is about, vote for the party that it is that you want to see in government. And at this point in time, it might even be, that ideally you'd be looking for the Greens to be the government because that's really where your heart lies. But for all of us, getting independence is the number one priority, because it's only then, when we get independence, that all those other things that we really believe in actually become possible. So I just think the most powerful position by far is to be looking at an SNP majority.
Okay, all right. Let's see. So let's see. Let's see. One of the questions was, did we need Section 30 for the referendum in 1997? No, because that was the referendum to approve the Scotland Act, which had the Section 30 in it. So the Section 30 was not granted for the 1997 one because it was enacting the Scotland Act. Let's see. Let's see. What would you say to people who have heard, the back in 2016 or the 2015 elections, or that there would be that would be a mandate for independence, or in 2016 and the voting for, and then also in the Brexit referendum, they said that a material change in circumstances would result in that. Basically, the SNP has said this before, and there have been previous mandates that have not been acted upon. So how would you respond to that?
So I think quite a lot of the time people were kind of looking at it and they're saying, what have the SNP actually done since 2014 to actually get independence? Is something that people quite often think. But we didn't. In 2011, we had a majority, and that's what got us the referendum. We haven't had that majority since then. So in 2016, we didn't get a majority. The Greens made it a majority independence parliament, and they have just turned us down, and they've said absolutely no to us there. But the Scottish Government and the SNP haven't sat about and done absolutely nothing. They've passed the referendum bill as well. Nicola did announce that there would be a referendum in 2020, and then we had COVID hitting us there as well there. The referendum question it's been agreed and sent for testing. So there have been things happening round about it there. We're going to have the ultimate say in the question and on the voting franchise there. So it's about putting it in your manifesto, but then it's about actually getting that manifesto through. And what they're telling us just now, despite the fact that Boris has way less support in the rest of the UK, way less percentage of the vote than we do for Scotland, they've got the legitimacy even to carry through Brexit, but we're still being told that we don't have the legitimacy to actually take forward an independence referendum. And the fact that it's been given the legitimacy before, because in 2011 we won a majority, then it just makes it almost impossible for them to argue that, they're not going to do it this time around, that they're going to go against that majority.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay. Last question, and I'll let you give your final plug of why people should vote for you. But are the SNP so blind that the threats of Westminster that are not going away? In other words, we've seen there's the internal markets bill that's been proposed, and the very real possibility, that we're seeing, that the Westminster government has taken over powers that were devolved to the Scottish government, and there's been many developments since then that suggest that there are, and also the other day there was they took the Scottish Parliament voted unanimously to implement the rights of the child from the UN, and that was taken to court. I mean, how much longer should this go on? And what would, in your view, doesn't that give it a much more of an urgency that Alba's trying to promote that the current SNP government doesn't seem to have, or at least outwardly? I'll let you respond to that, and then go ahead and.
No, I don't think for a second that there isn't a sense of urgency. The internal market bill is just utterly appalling. It's absolutely horrific for them as well to be standing against children's rights in such a manner as well is just utterly ridiculous. But how much have you seen this in the press? It's not that. Yeah. So it basically gets shut out. It's utterly ridiculous. It basically gets shut out.
I know, and it no matter how the court case goes, it just sucks so much energy out of how much are they gonna have to pay the lawyers to fight it, all the arguments about it, and when they're again, that for me that speaks to a great urgency of finding a way to get out more quickly than having a referendum. But again, that's just
so absolutely it is. It's not the fact that it doesn't have urgency. Absolutely, it is urgent, but it is absolutely critical that we win. This is the real issue. It's absolutely critical that we win, and we need time to get out, to talk to people on the doorsteps, for people to actually digest things and think it through. If we go too fast, people are going to have exactly the same kind of concerns as they did last time, or just feel like it's all a bit rushed, feel like it's not organised. We're in a situation just now where Nicola Sturgeon has shown really strong, really steady leadership. I mean, you look at Nicola Sturgeon, then you look at Boris Johnson, and you're just like, there's just, it becomes laughable, basically. But we're not right up there in the polls as far as support for independence is concerned, and I think we need to be really careful that we don't just bolt forward too fast for an awful lot of people who are maybe folk that are averse to change. I think we're in a situation just now where a lot of people, and you're finding this when you're chapping the doors and stuff too. There's been, for example, businessmen that have been off during COVID as well. We've had a few of them that have joined the party recently. In fact, some good donations to my campaign too. And for the very first time, they've actually been at home. They've watched Nicola Sturgeon giving the COVID updates. They've seen the news and the questions and the way they've come in at it, and they've been absolutely shocked, you know, what's going on. And they've started watching a wee bit of Westminster and a wee bit of Holyrood as well. And for the first time in their lives, they've actually gone, oh my God, something needs to change about this. And they've gone from being somebody that never even really considered independence to actually thinking, I'm out there campaigning for it because we really, really need things to change. So I think there's a lot of people like the status quo, but we're in a situation now where actually what Scotland's doing and the idea of independence is actually starting to seem a bit more like this, a bit more close to the status quo than the craziness that's going on with Brexit and that's going on with Boris Johnson everywhere else.
Okay. So so you're free to make your case for your candidacy before we say goodbye.
So I suppose, as far as I'm concerned, if you're voting for, most people are going to vote for parties. You know, the SNP are looking after the things that really, really matter to us. It's about education. It's about starting when children are young. It's about bringing in, basically, doubling the nursery hours is something that's going to be finished by later on this year. It's a wee bit delayed by COVID there, giving our kids the best start in life. It's about every kid getting a chance of having a tablet or a laptop, and also of having that connected to the internet as well there to make sure that they're on a level playing field. The attainment gap was drawn closer there. Exam grades were going up as well. It's also about having free school meals for those kids as well. If kids aren't nourished and they're not staying in warm homes, so the Scottish Child Payment is going to make a huge, huge difference to families from that point of view there as well. It's also about going beyond school, where you've got the Scottish Youth Guarantee as well, and that means that every young person who's coming out of school will have the opportunity of training, further education, a job, doing voluntary work. They'll have an opportunity to be doing something and moving on. They're not going to be sitting in their houses starting to get depressed there. It's about our National Health Service as well. You know, COVID, we've all suffered tragedies. We've all found life incredibly, incredibly hard just now. Our National Health Service, I mean, all the employees and the workers there have stepped up and they've been completely and utterly amazing, and yet we're still in a situation where our NHS is going to be at risk from Boris Johnson with Brexit and all the rest of it as well there. So the SNP is like right at the heart of the NHS plan, and you're looking at a situation where National Health Service staff are getting the biggest pay rise in devolution history, the biggest in kind of like one shot there as well, where they're looking at a national wage for carers as well, where we're looking at a national care service where you're getting a bit of parity with social care alongside the NHS. And the NHS itself, you're looking at there'll be you'll be getting the kind of dedicated elective and diagnostic treatment centres as well. So it means that things like hip operations, for example, that just now can get delayed because there's emergency operations, that those operations will no longer get delayed, that they'll go forward and they'll get carried out. As well as that, you've got the new cancer diagnostic centres that are going to be opening as well. So we're doing a bit of a catch up there as well, because there have been people who haven't been checked in time, and there's things that we need to catch up on there and make sure that's coming through. So all these steps are being taken, and it's all about looking at our people, looking after everybody and helping people have better chances in their life, helping to make sure that everybody actually thrives. So I would certainly say to people, as far as I'm concerned, I'm an individual that's honest and I'm upfront, and I think one of the biggest parts of the job that we can do is really listening to people. Listening more again too. I know when I was chair of social work as well, it wasn't just about sitting down and listening to the directors and listening to the heads of service. I went out and went to the AGMs for Inclusion Scotland to find out what they thought about SDS, and not just what, you know, our chiefs of social work thought, because sometimes the cake that's coming out the oven can look really, really nice, but you have to ask the person eating it what that cake tastes like and how good it is to really find out what it's all about there. And that's certainly what I'll be doing. So if you want me as your SNP candidate, then vote for me in the constituency. If you want the SNP to be the next Scottish Government, vote for them in the regional, and also Nicola Sturgeon as the next First Minister.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. It was a pleasure to interview you, and you know, I hope we'll cross paths again sometime soon.
Hopefully we will. Thank
Okay.
you very much. Really enjoyed it, Mark.
Okay.